before in 2014 when I moved to the LA. I was like, I'm sick of engineering, but I'm not at that point to go full time into the business yet. I need to learn more, but I need to get paid. I need to still keep food on the table. I had a skill set that was valuable to a developer, and that developer saw that and offered me a job, a 6-figure job. And so I was able to then take that next step in life, because everyone starts down this journey of entrepreneurship and wants to quit straight away and just do it 100%. And that's awesome. But when you got to keep a roof over your head and food on the table, and using employment as a stepping stone to get to your ultimate goal, I think is quite key, and still very valuable to this day.
Welcome to the Path to Passive podcast, where we talk about building wealth and empowering lifestyle through commercial real estate investing for tech professionals. I always wish that other tech professionals reaching financial freedom had documented their journey along the way, so I'm doing it for the rest of us. Join us as we explore stories, many failures, and lessons learned along the way. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. Reed, dude, I am so excited to have you here. Just like we were talking back in the green room, you have been on my Dream 100 for quite some time. You had been a coach there in Raise Masters. I've seen you. I've read your book, Investing in the US. I haven't got to your second book as well, but, you have been quite an influence in the space. And one of the things that was really cool to see at the very start, and I've heard you talk on other podcasts, is at the first chapter of your book, Investing in the US, you have Change Your Story, Change Your Life, Tony Robbins. And I have to say, even though your book is about multifamily, I'm sure you've read other books in the real estate spaces. You've been coming up just like, this is so dry, but not often you get to hear or read a book where you have Aussie quotes at the very end either to make it more entertaining. So thank you for being such a big influence. Thank you for making real estate fun, entertaining, and having such a really inspirational story as well, from working in the south of France, from chasing a girl, now your wife, to New York City, and saying that this is going to be a long journey, but with the hard work, you can certainly get the results too. So with that, thank you for being here. And could you maybe highlight a couple of other notes there about who you are in the background for anyone who hasn't had the pleasure to hear from you yet?
Well, first of all, I want to say that's the most flattering introduction I've ever had in my entire life. So thank you. I'm blushing here. If you're listening to on, through audio, there is a video of it. I'm red as a strawberry. So now, man, look, awesome to be here. Look, other things and other quotes that you want to. That's sort of what I live my life by. That's the gist of the question. Look, I think in one of those early episodes that you probably have listened to, like, I remember my dad telling me, "A fool and their money are easily parted." That seems to be a very good one. So don't be a fool with your money. And my dad was just a high school teacher. He was a high school teacher, but mathematics teacher. He was always pretty frugal with his money. And, for a high school teacher, he was able to invest in real estate and do quite well for himself, and retired at a nice age of 60 or 62. So, there's just something about just being smart with your money. And that's not a special source. It's just having the ability to go and learn, because money isn't complicated. If I have $100, it doesn't care what I do with it. It doesn't have any emotions. We have all the emotions, and we're the ones that usually screw it up, right? Or not do it. So going out and being smart with your money isn't necessarily a difficult thing. It just requires patience and reading and being educated. It doesn't quite require a fancy degree. There's some very basic principles to investing your money, investing wisely. But I think the fool and the money are easily parted is a good one.
Yeah, you have that. I think it's like chapter 5 or 6 at the very end you have there. That's pretty cool.
Look at you. Yeah, there we go. I haven't picked up that book in a minute.
And that is Reed Goossens. I was looking for who that was. So that's your father. That's a really cool shout out. Yeah, man, that's awesome. So listen, you have, like I said, a really cool story, and I'm always listening for and reading, looking out for the nuggets of what some of those insights and distinctions were, because we remember principles, right? Remember principles. It's much easier to remember principles than read, what advice should I do now, right?
Yep.
And so, from, moving from Australia to coming to US 6 months later, getting your first, what was it, triplex? First triplex to doing some flips. I mean, well, that was after coming to the US, picking a subset of firms, less than 30 is what you had said, because they wouldn't have an HR department or something like that to go and, just really show up and door knock these people to get the job, to doing your first flip, to finally getting to other, RIAs and stuff like that. Ultimately to, getting a couple of those under your belt, but finding one of your friends who it was like a coffee or something where he had done a closed on 70 units.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Scott Reese. Shout out to Scott as well. Yeah. Keep going. This is good.
And so, there's some ahas along the way here. There's many more. You've talked about, freedom of time in your, not this background, but in your other background of your podcast. You have Who Not How, which I also have behind me.
You've got as well. Yep.
But what I really wanted to, I make this as a backdrop to really want to ask you questions like, what were some of those other insights that you have over the years where you had to develop as an entrepreneur, as a business person? Because your shift from keeping your W-2 to doing some of these flips, to doing multifamily, retiring from your W-2, with 1,000 units you've already syndicated, this is a slow burn for an identity shift, right? But there were definitely insights that you had along the way as becoming an entrepreneur. Can you remember what any of those were and maybe what some of those events were?
Yeah, look, one of the things I've talked about in the past, particularly as you're trying to make a break into an industry that you're really, passionate about, and it doesn't matter really what industry you're in, and is understanding the skill set that I could offer someone so I could go get the highest W-2 job at the time to continue to learn. And at the time I have a structural engineering degree, worked as a structural engineer for many years before. In 2014, when I moved to the LA, I was like, I'm sick of engineering, but I'm not at that point to go full time into the business yet. I need to learn more, but I need to get paid. I need to still keep food on the table. And that was I had a skill set that was valuable to a developer, and that developer saw that and offered me a job, a 6-figure job. And so I was able to then take that next step in life. And because everyone starts down this journey of entrepreneurship and wants to quit straight away and just do it 100%. And that's awesome. But when you got to keep a roof over your head and food on the table, and for me at the time, I was on a visa. So I had to have a job associated with me being in the country. So that was quite a mental shift, and using employment as a stepping stone to get to your ultimate goal, I think is quite key and still very valuable to this day, right? I don't care what business you're in, trying to learn the tricks of the trade in a professional environment and getting paid for it is sort of like, why not, right? Another element looking back, we're sitting here in 2026, we've had an awesome bubble of multifamily, and talking about the journey of being an entrepreneur and moving up the stack. So, going from learning and understanding investment and money and how it works into picking a horse of real estate, right? Because you can pick other horses, not come full circle, to going in there going, hell, let's do a small triplex because that's what I can afford, to then going in and doing a fix and flip because that's a little bit more money, to again going into doing partial syndication with a co-GP, which is quite a big jump. Like you're going from fix and flip into syndication is a huge jump, to now going into, we're buying accounting firms and understanding the value of what my widget can provide to me. Again, I've sort of quickly moved off the gaining of the experience into what's my widget, right? Well, my widget for the last 10, 12, 13 years has been a box with walls that I rent out, whether it be a triplex or 250 units.
Yep.
But in the last couple of years, we've found that the market will be, I'm not in control of what rents I can garner for my search. So if I have a 100-unit property, I'll have a ceiling on what people are willing to pay for my 100 units, right? And in the good times, it was great, right? But then all of a sudden, supply hits. A lot of supply hits. And my rents crater, and I have no control over that. That really started to change the way I am as an entrepreneur, and the widget in which I'm selling and the control of that widget. And we talk, and there's a lot of chatting in the, as you learn financial literacy and independence and around control, and I can control the net operating income. I can control value add, and I can put lipstick on a pig and all that sort of stuff. And then it's true. It's 100% true. Don't get me wrong. But the market is bigger than what I can control. And that has been a real shift in how I think about business today and what I'm going on to do, evolve, like I evolved from a fix and flip into a triplex into, there's always going to be an evolutionary thing. And I think for me as a company with RSN and now subsequently Accounting First Group, which I can talk about, I'm adding another leg to the stool, because it's all well and good when the market's hot, but when the market's not and things go against you, then that's I can't control that, right? And I've got investors to answer to, and I've got, performers to hit. So that's been quite a stark reality for me in probably the last 3 or 4 years, that creating more of an ecosystem of businesses or things that I can do. So I'm not just relying on a one-trick pony to keep the lights on, or to do, when the market's great, the market's great. But when the market's not great, what are you doing in other times?
So this is absolutely fascinating, because a couple of the principles out there is pattern recognition, for sure, is one of the things. And you have to be in the game for that, right? The other one, like you're talking about, is we all have experience and we can all provide value somewhere, but it's how do you package those skills up to be valuable wherever that is, right? And that flexibility there too, to, I'll say, know when to pivot, but as you would talking about as well, never put your pencils down, always be underwriting, always be paying attention to the market, and always be looking at where the opportunity is, right? And so
Right.
would those be, and in this case, you're leveraging to accounting firms, which I would love to hear and more about, because, moving on from this piece, one of my questions is that you've been multifamily for a long time. And not only that, but you started your podcast in 2014, which has been a long time here now in 2026. But before we get in that, while still talking about extracting some lessons here on this point too, on the identity part, what do you remember what it was that gave you the aha that you really needed to start a podcast?
Oh yeah, for sure. It was around, building a brand, right? It's how do you shorten 5, 6, 7, 10 years of getting to know someone and trust and like into a very short period of time. And that's what brand building does. That's, no one can take my personal brand away from me. I build it up. I can, my brand is my brand, right? If I do something wrong, if I am fraudulent, if I steal money, that brand is gone in an instant, right? So it's high, I put myself out there for the recognition, but it's also something that it's who I am I built around a business around that. And that's not back in the time of 2014. That was probably early days of personal branding, right?
Yes.
Now I wrote 2 books as a subsequent, and those book, the book that you mentioned earlier was literally just the first 50 episodes of my podcast into book form, right? So it's regurgitating
recycling.
media, repurposing, recycling media across multiple platforms. Today, the podcast is not as big as what it once was, because the brand of RSN Property Group as a multifamily syndication firm has now started to stand on its own 2 feet, which is what you want, right? Which then allows me to do other things like Accounting First Group, which is, don't get me wrong, there's no, multi is great and I'm going to always do it, and that's going to be the core of the business, but you need other things and we can get into ecosystems about why go and diversify. And it's not diversifying by just picking up anything, but it's been specific and strategic about a thing in a business that has been a pain point that I've noticed in the last couple of years to then go and solve.
So let's get into that. And my question on that is, we've seen, I'm sure you have, of course, the people over the years of, hey, not multifamily anymore. I'm interested in doing mobile home parks, or there's no money in multifamily. Let's go over to self-storage, right? And I'm wondering, from your perspective, your experience here, what did you see in those assets that made you think maybe not? And what made you go into these accounting firms instead? What was this opportunity that you were seeing?
No, it's a very good question, right? The whole idea of, being an inch wide and mile deep, that's very true, right? So as the last 10 years, longer, 12 years have been incredible, right? There was also luck. And when I got started, the Jobs Act changed in 2012, which was a very important pivotal moment in the way in which you raise money. what I'll call it, the de-riskification, if that's even a word, of how institutions view alternative assets like commercial real estate. So you have the combination of those two things coupled with very low interest rates was a perfect storm for, and coming out of the 08 crash, right? I was lucky to start then. When I look back at where we are today, the ambiguity of multi, at least dried up for a period of time there, for a long period. And one of the biggest things that I personally believe is technology. Technology has had an outsized weighted on particularly multi, hotels, yes, office, yes, but it just in commercial real estate in general in terms of data collection, completely, changed the game and lowered the bar, right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't take a genius. Like 10, 15 years ago, I would have to call my comps to find out what they're renting their 1 and 2 and 3 bedrooms for. Today, at a click of a button, I can find out the last 3 years of rental data. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so that doesn't, I'm a good operator, but it doesn't, the bar's been lowered. So it's a very busy lane, coupled with all the other things that I mentioned, the demystification of the alternative asset class from institutional world, Jobs Act, low interest rate. It really created a perfect storm. And we got really frothy there, right?
Yep.
And we're now I would call it, we've been in a recession particularly at least in the multi space, commercial as well. Like look at office space. I'm not as familiar with self-storage or industrial, but there are elements from what we just mentioned: low interest rates, low supply, oversupply. Oh crap! The pendulum swung too far the other way. Now we're like having to, if you're an owner of existing assets at that point, rents maybe have plummeted. You've got to compete against new product. That's making it harder on your valuations. There's a lot of things. So there's been more of a going from the industry of syndication has also grown up a little bit in the last couple of years. And that has required a business owner like myself to look at other things, because I can't just sit around waiting for the market to change. Right. And don't get me wrong, I love multi. We're very good at it. We're very good at identifying deals, but it is also an asset class today where people aren't as excited as they once were. Doesn't mean you can't get excited, and there's some great deals. We've closed on 3 or 4 great deals in the last couple of years, but it wasn't, you rewind to 2020, 2019, 2020, 2021, just the frenzy of people wanting to invest in it has completely changed. And I think that's got a lot to do with also institutionally, there's been a big pullback. Right? A lot of big institutions have pulled back from commercial real estate as an alternative asset in the last couple of years as interest rates went up and, other inflationary stuff goes on. That's starting to change. Do we see in 12 months' time that the retail market starts to come back into multi? Maybe. I don't have a crystal ball, but going through, your quote unquote first recession is really where we're at right now. So back to your other question. Why didn't I choose those other asset classes? At the time, it was just focused on what we were doing right. And we're not a firm that does 10 deals a year. We don't have the bandwidth for that. We try to do 3 to maybe 5 deals a year at max in the peak there. We did 3 deals last year. We're on track to do about 3 or 4 deals this year. So I don't want to be the biggest company of multifamily. I want to be sustainable. So do I then go and add mobile home parks in there, or add self-storage? Maybe, but I then have to be an expert on this other vertical. And so we looked at debt, we looked at press, we looked at other cash flow. And what's been the issue is that with technology, the ambiguity has really shrunk in multi. So there's not as much cash flow. How do you go find cash flow? Well, you can create a debt fund, you can create a pref fund, or you could go and look at other businesses that have a lot of ambiguity because technology is not there, and using the things that I learned from the multi game when I first got started and other elements. And, accounting firms happen to be one of those. There's many things out there. You can HVAC companies and, all this sort of stuff. But we saw as an opportunity in the accounting firms. I'm not an accountant, but there is an opportunity to start collecting these things up like we've done with the multi, and potentially have a cross-sell opportunity with the clients of the tax firms to want to invest in a tax-efficient element like real estate. So there's a cross sell there. So that's the cherry on top. The meat and potatoes is that it is very ambiguous in terms of just I can't just click online and tell me within a 10-mile radius what's the different charges of of a CPA firm. That technology or that data doesn't exist in these certain fragmented businesses, which creates ambiguity, which creates opportunity and creates good margin. And going back to the widget that I was talking about earlier, my 100 units, I'm capped out at max. Well, now in an operating business, I can look at my value add is, well, what if I added another employee? Would that employee increase? Would I be at a 6-figure employee? Can that then increase my top line revenue by $1 million a year? Right? I don't have a ceiling on what I can charge, or because it's a different widget. Now, it's services, and I'm not going to get into the risk of the differences of them because I understand that there's one's a physical and one's essentially goodwill, but you understand that the top line, and I'll pause after this, the top line coming from one side to the other to then assess ambiguity, risk, and what am I selling as a widget, and then creating value from that.
Yeah, there's a couple of really key points here that not only do I want to highlight, but I want to ask some follow-up questions on, because this has been really top of mind for me. And I know in conversations I've had with, people, fellow colleagues, et cetera, on this too. But, let me just touch on a couple things that you said already about when you had come into real estate. It was kind of the perfect storm of things, right? You were talking, I think you had mentioned interest rates, but you also mentioned, the Jobs Act, where we could raise capital from other people. And there was still ambiguity, but there was still chaos, right? And that allowed, anytime there's chaos somewhere, it's an opportunity to sort things out, right? And so it was kind of this perfect storm of things for you. And we'll call it, not to say that multifamily and apartments haven't been around for a while, but there was a maturation. There was a bunch of supply that came into of units, but also operators that was like, oh, this is really interesting, right? So, but then the skills that you had, prior to real estate, but of course that development while you were there too, allowed for that transferability of skills once again, right? And so am I hearing that correctly then? Just trying to recap some of this.
Yeah, there's a transfer of skills, but also looking at, like, one other thing that I'll add to that is the business in a box. Like, I'm going to go buy 150 units because I can raise money really quickly because everyone loves it. And then I'm going to go hire a local property manager to do the day-to-day.
Right.
Like, it's very no wonder there's so many people
straightforward
in this space. It's very straight. It's very, and again, there's so much to it than that. There's asset management and who you I'm not going to, but you go buy these CPA firms, for example. I bought 2 of them so far, right? There's no property management company out there or management company that comes in and just says, I'm just going to start running this CPA for you. That doesn't exist. You are the management company, right? So software, accounting, just looking at accrual versus cash, which I'm getting so off into the weeds.
Yep.
But these are things that you take for granted when you go buy 150 units and you slap Mr. ABC property management on, and they're going to produce you, a bunch of books every year. So there's just, what I'm trying to get at is that as you grow as an entrepreneur, so come bring it all the way back to your original question, is like identifying trends, and not necessarily trends like I'm trying to beat the market. It's just identifying things in which you can control and you can't control. I can't control market rents. I can't control supply. I can't control interest rates, right? These things matter to valuations, cash flow, and investor sentiment, right?
Yes.
What I can control is culture, is marketing, is, my widget, right?
Yep.
And if I can change that, and trying to look for the most ambiguous things, but still keeping like the training wheels on, if that makes sense.
Yep,
Right.
I got it. So you still have some guardrails on, and you understand the components.
Correct.
So is this the ecosystem that you're talking about here then? Of having the real estate on one side where it's, it's a great place to quote unquote store wealth, have tax benefits, but business is a place for cash flow. And really you have, in a lot of ways, you have to be a much better operator too, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Like the number one, like we're in private equity, right? And we our biggest clients, most of them have very good, heavy cash flow businesses that they use that cash flow to invest into our deals.
Yeah.
Most of them. And when you realize that, you say to yourself, why don't I have a widget that cash flows better?
Right. So I know we got like 20, 10, 12 minutes left. And man,
Take your time.
But where I definitely wasn't expecting you to talk about the accounting stuff, because my question was, what are you looking at next, given where you're seeing everything, and you're answering this question already, talking about the business, about real estate and the businesses and the accounting firms. Because I'll bring people on the podcast, I'll ask them things like, how do you build your organization? How do you think about culture? How do you think about organizational health? And it doesn't come up. But if you ask a business person, like, who's growing a business about these things, that will be a little more top of mind, because you're, Dan Sullivan, Gino Wickman, I'm sure Dan Martell, all of these names who, has been an influence. I mean, you have it behind you on another background for you. But the people that talk about US, that talk about, management, entrepreneurship, and organizational health, have you been growing? How has your skills as an entrepreneur developed coming into this business space as well? What are some of the insights that you're getting that more recently that is an aha moment for you?
Yeah, look, I think there's an element still of what's core to who I am, right? And what I set out to achieve. And I mentioned earlier, like at the core of what I want to do and who I am, and, the sort of box ticking that I want to go do, I don't really want 200-300 employees. Like I really don't. Like I don't want a corporation. Like I'm more leaning to, I wouldn't say lifestyle, but you know what I mean? Like a smaller business, like, sub 50 employees. Like at RSN right now, we have 8, right? And, we still third party property manage and all that sort of stuff. So we keep it pretty nimble. And with the accounting firms, we're buying firms in between sort of 6 to 10 employees. We're not in buying. So even if we went and bought 10 firms, maybe we have 100 employees, but at that point you'd have a CEO in place. So culture is very important. The things that I've learned around what we do is all that, regardless of what business you're in, real estate, multifamily, asset management, CPA firms, it is about people management. It's about humans are very inefficient. We're emotional beings, and setting up good culture that people are heard, people have input, they understand where the ship is sailing to, not just being one cog in the piece. All those things, whatever you want to call it, and some people call it fluff. I don't call it fluff. I think it's really important. Mission statements, all that stuff is very crucial to building a team around you who wants to come to work and who wants to row in that same direction. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's where I can go into specifics of that about building culture and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, what we all do is try as leaders and entrepreneurs and whatever, is try and lead people to, do the best they can and want to show up for work and, put out a really awesome product.
For sure. And so that makes sense too, because, I don't know, even on your site, you're with a surfboard, so I can see lifestyle and, having freedom of purpose, freedom of time is still big. You don't want to get all these things and build yourself into a thing you have to manage, right? It's about, and so that makes sense. And did I hear you correctly then that some of the things you're learning more about or focusing on more on is about culture as you get into business and get into, these accounting firms? As an example, this is the widget, right? This is the thing that makes sense right now. Is culture what you're learning more about and is becoming a bigger emphasis for you now?
It was always there for me. I think it's more to do when you go from being a sole entrepreneur to having one employee to then having to, 3 employees and then managing, like just understanding their needs and their wants and managing their expectations in the sense that their assets to my business is important, right? So back to people management, everyone from the property manager all the way through to my chief investment officer, it's, people want to be heard, people want to be seen, people want to turn up and have say, excuse my language, fuck yeah, let's go to work today and work with Reed. You know what I mean? Like that's so call that culture, call that whatever you want to call it, but that is important and it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to, have fun, make impact, income and impact, right? But also, just like you said, fuck yeah, let's do it. Yeah. So, things have changed a lot. Again, I'm only mentioning this because I'm painting this picture of seeing things evolve over time. I mean, I'm pretty sure I mentioned at the start of this, you're a coach for a group there. We had a couple conversations and about with funds as well. And so the space has definitely matured from syndications to funds and whatever else would be next. So I set that up as, kind of teeing up of, what else are you seeing on the horizon that is of interest, or you think that might be something to look into? You don't have to spill, everything here, because I'm sure there's things that are maybe things you're still noodling on. But what's interesting in the horizon for you?
Look, I think right now is a very good time to be buying real estate. Like the pricing readjustment that we have seen in the market, the dislocation is real. There's blood in the street. Deals are being handed back left, right, and center. There's some good buying opportunities right now. The hard part is convincing equity to come along for the ride. Like, are we at the bottom? Are we not at the bottom? That's a conversation we're having a lot on, and why we've looked at accounting firms as maybe a cross sell to when we're in the retail space is being decimated with so many gurus and online ads and all that sort of stuff. Don't get me wrong, we do the same thing. We drink from the same Kool-Aid. We also fish in the same fishing hole, right? So I think there will come a time where it's back. We're back at positive rent growth, and there's a little bit more positive sentiment around it. But right now, what we're seeing is some very good buying opportunities that haven't been seen in a long time. Like I'm talking pricing of back in 2017, 2018 pricing. So you're going back 6 or 7 years, and that's a function of income, right? It's a function of rent. So I think that it's a very good time to be buying. Other things outside of that, like obviously AI is massive, right? Like I'm not a guru of AI, but we're kind of building out our own internal asset management dashboard for RSN.
Cool.
That may have some uses in commercial space that we could go sell it. I don't know if we will, but like there's just the access to information and making our employees so much more efficient with AI is really cool to see. And I think we're only just starting there. How that impacts such a, archaic dinosaur business like real estate, which is very mano a mano, will be interesting to see, right? There's that sign in Germany, right? Hey, ChatGPT, come and finish off this building, right? It's not gonna do that today, right, or maybe even anytime in the future. But it's a tool that we're using to be more efficient across the board, and that's really interesting. And the AI overlords may grow into something else. But right now, that's what I'm looking at more from an efficiency point of view, more than like a trend or anything like that. So yeah,
got you. And kind of to close us out here, one of the things that we touched on some really cool stuff where you're at right now. Obviously, the projects with the accounting firms, how you're taking your skills and growing in with the businesses and this ecosystem of synergy of real estate and businesses too. Super cool to hear. But you talked about timing of things when you were getting real estate, right? I capped some of those already as well. And so, people that are listening to this, they're tech professionals, right? They're accredited investors. They're making good income. And like most people, investors you've talked to that are, mostly LPs as an example, they've got cash, but there may be a little bit of time poor, right? And so, if you can put whatever hat on to answer this question, thinking about that slow burn of time to go from your W-2 to having your units to ultimately quitting your W-2 as well, based on where we're at, what, with, I would say the market, but the state of the world, the state of the tech, the state of multifamily, of businesses, whatever, what advice would you give? What suggestions? What would you tell people that are looking to start investing now? How would you counsel?
Well, I think, look, that goes back to what I said earlier. Fool and the money are easily parted. I think the other thing, so to be educated, you're already listening to podcasts and you're trying to be up to date. What is it called? The average dollar invested Like we're always looking to put money on the street. As an investor, I'll always look to put money on the street every single year, right? I want to be, some years I'll time it really well, and some years I won't. Like that's
dollar
just
cost
the
averaging.
Dollar cost average. That's what I was looking at.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So like as an investor, you have to make the right decisions with the data you have today, right? And the decisions that I've made over the years were based on data at hand, right? If I knew that we were going to have a ton of supply or interest rates were going to go up 500%, I would have made some different decisions, but I don't have a crystal ball. So all I can say to folks is if you're going to look to invest over the long term, make sure that your dollar cost average is that you're investing every single year and that you're investing in things that you're aware, you're tuned into the market, right? So hearing me say, hey, this is a great time to be buying, well, go off and do your own research about that. Why is it a great time to be buying? And what are you trying to buy? Like, are you trying to get into the multifamily space? Are you looking for that passive income to offset your active income? Mm-hmm. Hence why you would want to be more in the commercial real estate space and looking at the cost segregation and depreciation. If that's what you want, then fantastic. Like, go off and do that and try and keep some guardrails on when you go do that. Fixed rate debt, buying with positive leverage day one, that sort of stuff. That protects you over the long term. And then when you've sort of parked that money in whatever it might be, next year, looking at, are you doing it again or you got to do something else? Like you're always constantly putting money on the street. And I think there's a diversification element, 100%. I totally agree with diversification, but I don't agree with diversification to the nth degree. I believe across a few key things, but constantly putting money on the street, constantly being educated, always learning. It's a little bit cliche, but I'm learning stuff today that if you interviewed me 10 years ago, I wouldn't be as wise as what I am today. So, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. That's always be educated and, continue to educate yourself over time. I also wanted to ask, what, you've talked about 6 Ps in one of your second book. This is about, having these different, one of them being platform. And you also already talked about how the first 50 episodes were the first book for you investing in the US. You've still been doing this podcast. You can tell people where they are. I'll make sure it's in the show notes here in just a second as we close out. But when did you know, or how did you decide it was the right time for you to write your first and second book? And if you were to write another book, what do you think that type of book would be on?
At the first book, it was just about flooding the market with content, right? That was the purpose. Now, looking back, that was the purpose. At the time, it was just like, do it. It wasn't ask any questions. It was, of course, yeah, duh. Like when someone said, why don't you replicate your podcast in book form and you can be a quote unquote bestseller? Like, oh yeah, of course, it's so logical. The second book came around by just through a mastermind of Aussies who are in the real estate space here in the US. And we just sort of leverage each other because we didn't all want to write an individual book, but we all wrote a chapter about our stories and we call it 10,000 Miles to the American Dream. Yeah. That was more of a bit of fun, but you got another book out the door. You know what I mean? If I was to write another book today, maybe. I don't know if I'm specifically passionate about one thing that I want to, like the brand building. It was very specific around brand building. Podcast books was around the brand and getting recognition. Now today, it's more about track record and doing things well as an organization, which we get judged on today. So it's a bit of a more of a morphing, if that's the right word.
Evolution.
Evolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think in general, there's always going to be, you look back in time, having a personal brand, having, thought leadership is always going to be a very good stick in your corner, regardless of where you are in the market, right? And so constantly putting out content, constantly putting out good content will always be important. And you don't need to have 20,000 listeners, 50,000, 100,000 listeners. You can have 500 investors that repeat, that in your deal every single time. You're gonna have a very good life. So there's always going to be an element of brand awareness, 100%. It just looks a little different and will be different as 2014 podcasting was just a thing. Now today it's TikTok and all those other things
Oh, yeah.
that I'm not on those platforms. Well, at least I'm not personally, but my marketing team is. So trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, is also around about energy that you want to, I want to put out quality rather than quantity at this point in my life. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say again, I really appreciate you being here. It's been a lot of fun to, have you here and catch up. And like I said, the 2 books, wonderful. I was, definitely all the listeners, go check those out. Check out Reed's podcast. I've always appreciated how you seem like you could be someone that, I could just approach and, crack open a beer with and have a talk to. So, where would you like people to, find you? And I'll make sure it's in the show notes. I know you've got a lot of resources out there. So
yeah, look, the easiest way is to go to rsnpropertygroup.com. That's www.rsnpropertygroup.com. You can go to my personal page, which is reedgoossens.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm active on Instagram as well. And you can just hit me up. If you're ever coming through Los Angeles, it's reed@rsnpropertygroup.com. Hit me up and we can talk shop about investing.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Path to Passive. We love connecting with our listeners and those on the path to architecting their wealth and improving their lives. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to see in the future episodes. Get in touch with us through email or Instagram. See you next week for a new episode.